everybody, both those in the room and those who are joining us via the webcast. We did have over 100 people registered to join us on the webcast, so hopefully we've got quite a lot of people there. But huge apologies to those who are listening but not watching, because the video is not quite working, but there is audio, and we are recording the event, so you can watch it at a later date. This is the problem with technology. It's not quite as reliable as bits of paper. Anyway, for those who don't know me, I'm Manon Bradley. I'm the Development Director for the Major Projects Association. I know not everybody in the room is a member of the Major Projects Association, so I'll give you 2 seconds about who we are. We're a membership organisation for companies that are actively involved in the delivery of major projects. And one of our big initiatives is our Knowledge Hub. So for many years what we've done is we've held events where we've talked about all things related to major projects, and we've produced reports, all things to do with major projects. But we recognised that there was a great deal more out there, a great deal more knowledge and intelligence and genius and brilliance about how to do projects better. So 2 years ago we decided to set up the Major Projects Knowledge Hub. It's now quite a busy and thriving digital space where we have lots of resources, all of our reports, ODA reports, National Audit Office reports, Crossrail Learning Legacy, all sorts of bits and pieces, as well as interactions from our members. And Jonathan, who's sitting over by the hot desk, is the Knowledge Hub manager. I'm sure a lot of you know who Jonathan is. Now this event came about because Jo, who's sitting at the front, is producing a digital scrapbook as part of her offering to the Knowledge Hub. And a scrapbook can be on any topic, so I challenge any of you, if there's a topic that you have a burning desire to talk about and to share with your fellow professionals, you can create your own digital scrapbook, which is really just a collection of things. It might be a report, it might be a link, it might be a discussion, it might be an event, anything. You can link all of these things together and share them in the Knowledge Hub. So Jo is creating one of those, and in conversations that we've had about that, she said to me, "Oh, I'd just love to sit Mark Enzer down and ask him all these questions." And I said, "Well, that can be arranged." So we've come to tonight's event. Now we are experimenting a little bit with the format. I did want to call it In the Spotlight, but I thought that might be a little bit too terrifying for Mark. So what we have tonight is an interview / conversation between Jo Lucas, who's the founder of Co-Create, an industry improvement collective, and Mark Enzer, Chief Technical Officer from Mott MacDonald, on the topic of Project 13, Realistic Routemap or Impossible Challenge. So I'm going to ask each to introduce themselves and then we'll move into the conversation. So Jo, over to you.
Hello. I'm Jo Lucas. As Manon said, the co-founder of Co-Create. But I'm also an engineer and project manager, and I suppose more recently more of a management consultant in the major project industry over the last 20 plus years. But the reason why I'm interested in the Project 13 side of things is more to do with us building our own grand design. And we built it using design for manufacture and assembly sort of techniques. The house was built in Hull in 9 pieces and brought down. We utilised CNC machines at the Bartlett in order to make the furniture that goes inside the house. We use all sorts of different techniques of point cloud to help us work out temporary works. And the technology was fabulous, fantastic, and gave us an incredible flexibility in the way that we delivered our house. But what was deeply fascinating for me as a major projects person is the fact that the surrounding environment in which we were trying to deliver it just didn't work. So there was limited ways to get the project insurance to work. There were limited ways to get the financing. We ended up having to do almost what I called grandiosely the T5 methodology, i.e. we held all the risks centrally as the clients and did basically contract management centrally because we just couldn't get a decent price for building something so new. And I thought, this technology isn't new. The technology's actually been around for quite a long time. It's tried, it's tested, it works. What's not happening is the environment. So for me, the deep interest came with the Project 13 concept, where it's talking about, well, what do we do to get the industry ready? And hence the fact that I'm here to ask lots of questions.
Thank you. So, Mark Enzer, CTO at MacDonald. I was the workstream lead of the digital transformation workstream in Project 13. And I was on the steering group, so I've got a kind of a bit of an overview of the whole thing, but I understand the digital transformation piece in a little bit more detail. So I'm kind of hoping that's the way that the questions are going to go, but we'll see. I'm also the chair of the Digital Framework Task Group that has just released something called the Gemini Principles. So I'm quite keen to talk about that as well. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
I'll build those in. So I think just to start with, it'd be quite useful for those who don't know about Project 13 or have only got a very limited, seen something written up in the press, if you can just give us an idea of where it came from and what the purpose of Project 13 is.
Certainly. So can I just understand from the audience in the room here, how many people have heard of Project 13 and kind of know a bit about the background, so I know kind of where I'm going by show of hands? So quite a few in here do know. Okay. So that means I won't go right into the depths of its genesis. I'll just kind of start at a fairly high level. So Project 13 is really about trying to transform the infrastructure industry. It's a very big aim. It's not an initiative. The Project 13 people didn't think that we needed another initiative or another report. Project 13 is intended to be a movement. And so the idea is that we would gather together an ever bigger group of people who are transforming the industry. The origin of Project 13 really came from a recognition amongst client organisations, the infrastructure client group particularly, which isn't represented by all the infrastructure clients, but I would say by all of the most progressive infrastructure clients, coming together recognising that something has to change. That the existing model is broken, where you can see margins eroded to almost nothing. You can see a woeful productivity gap between what is achieved in manufacturing compared to what's achieved in construction. And also a recognition that the world is changing, particularly in respect of digital transformation. So a number of different streams coming together to say it's got to change. So that's kind of the origin. And then through a lot of engagement over a number of years, Project 13 was put together. And it was put together on the basis of 5 particular work streams. One called governance, another organisation. Integration is a really key part of it, and I guess we'll come back to talking about integration in a bit more detail. The capable owner, and then the one that I was leading, digital transformation. So a number of different areas in which industry leaders were identified to help try and drive forward an agenda under those headings that would come together as Project 13 and effectively enable some key principles that would drive this desired transformation. And some of those principles, and I guess kind of at the core of those principles, is a recognition that what's really important are outcomes rather than just outputs, and that we should have a whole life view. And therefore, I guess what that points towards is a bit of a redefinition of value in relation to outcomes per whole life pound rather than just outputs per capex pound. And a lot of the thinking around Project 13 stems from that redefinition, a review of what actually constitutes value.
So there's some words in there that I quite like, which is things like the movement, the outcome focus, levers, etc. But when you talk about a movement, how do you know if the movement's moved the industry?
How do you know if the movement's moved the industry? It is a really great question, and I think that as a movement, the movement has to move, doesn't it? And so I guess the real test is whether or not we do get more and better outcomes per whole life pound. I mean, that is the asset test, but it might take some time to see what those outcomes are. And I think that maybe a shorter term test would be seeing real change in some of the early adopters who are taking on board some of the Project 13 principles. And I think that if we see real movement and real change amongst those early adopters, then it would be fair to say that the movement is moving.
So who are the early adopters at the moment? Are people actually, is this like a set of principles, or is this a toolkit that you hand over, or what does it look like if someone adopts this early?
So I think the key thing is adopting the principles of Project 13. That's really at the core of it. There isn't kind of a handbook that you kind of give over and you say, just do that, and then you're doing Project 13. Because the industry comes in different shapes and sizes. And so for each of the early adopters, they will be applying the principles in slightly different ways, but it's still the same principles. So answering your question about who are the early adopters, I mean, the first up of the early adopters were Anglian Water, and they're trying to apply it on a new alliance for a cross-country pipeline. The Environment Agency, Heathrow for the expansion, and National Grid for the power tunnels, London Power Tunnels 2. But just recently, there have been two more early adopters, the kind of the next tranche, which is Network Rail and Sellafield. So you can tell these are big, important clients. They're not necessarily looking to adopt Project 13 across their whole program straight off. They're focusing on a particular part, a particular aspect, which I think is the right way. But applying the Project 13 principles in their own way with their own supply chain, and seeing how that goes. So that's the approach.
So we see, like, what sort of outputs will come out of Project 13 when you're looking at those particular projects? Is it like an IPA review kind of concept where you sort of say, look, they try to do these principles and this is how it's working? Or is it that you're linking them up to each other to support each other through this process?
Yes, so certainly linking up and sharing lessons between the early adopters. Another thing that Project 13 is doing are providing some mentors to help the organisations to not just understand the principles, but actually adopt them. And so what we're seeing already is that they're all adopting the principles in slightly different ways. And so one of the key things is around the use of an integrator that sits between the owner and the supply chain, the ecosystem of partners. And so the way in which different organisations are going about developing that integrator and deploying it is subtly different, and that is an entirely good thing.
So how's the integrator different than, say, having the ODA or HS2, etc., which is effectively between government, who are the owner of the final product, and the supply chain that you're getting in to do something like HS2? Is that the type of integrator you're talking about, or is it subtly different?
It's subtly different, I think. So the owner organisation, and there's a kind of a subtle change of terminology from client to owner, and what that points towards is the owner of the assets, but also the owner of delivering the outcomes for the ultimate customer. And so that's kind of what the owner is about. The integrator works with the owner to pull together the supplier ecosystem or the partner ecosystem to have consistent, joined, aligned objectives to deliver the desired outcomes. So the integrator pulls things together. And I think that the integrator therefore needs to have some very specific skills that at the moment I don't think we see in any one organisation around the industry just now. So should I maybe run through what some of those skills are?
No, quite useful actually.
Because I think if you imagine the perfect integrator, what that integrator would be able to do is fantastic design management. There are organisations around the industry who would be very good at design management, but also the integrator would have to be very good at construction management. And we don't see that many organisations that are both good at design management and construction management. We see different organisations good at each of those things. But even using that terminology is starting to sound a little bit old, because if we're moving into a DFMA world, then the language of design and construction might not be quite right. And so perhaps what we want to talk about is production management, which would then address not just design, but also manufacturing, logistics, assembly. And so production management would manage through all of those. And I don't think that we see around the industry organisations that can genuinely do that yet. They can do bits of it. So that's the production management bit. I also think that an integrator would need to be really good on program management. Now, we do see organisations that exist in the supply chain just now who are very good at program management, but not necessarily good at those other things I just mentioned. And within program management, I would obviously include risk management as kind of part of it. But then I think there's another kind of kid on the block, which comes out of the digital transformation work stream. I do need to keep emphasising that's the bit I'm comfortable talking about. And that is information management, because as we see information as this golden thread that joins everything up across the whole of the delivery process, then we really need to have very strong information managers, and that has to be a key part of what an integrator does. So if you add those three things together, you know, the production management, the program management, and the information management, and you say who in the supply chain can do all of those things just now, I don't think honestly there is any one organisation that can. And so what I think it points towards is kind of a partnership, pulling others together. Now, what I've just expressed there is probably a little bit of a Mark Enzer view rather than a formal Project 13 view, but it kind of stands to reason when you piece together all of the capabilities that an integrator must bring. But hopefully, by describing what that is, you can see that that organisation would be incredibly powerful to pull together the supply chain to deliver these outcomes that the owner organisation is desiring for the customers.
I find it interesting that you use the word organisation, because for me that sounds like a group of effectively SMEs or specific functions that you pull together to deliver that integrative function as and when required, as opposed to being, you know, the new Motts, they now are now integrators.
Well, I think we need to see what emerges, and I would hope that different organisations would come together, and that the integrator itself needs to be integrated. And you know, I think that's part of what's exciting about developing this.
I mean, this is quite a significant change from the model that we have at the moment, and taking it into the DFMA world of where I found that there's a gap between the capability of the organisations out there and the technology. So the technology's moved along quite a long distance, but I'm not sure if our supply chain at this point in time or the ecosystem that we have to choose from to create these integrators actually exists at the moment.
I think that probably is a fair comment. My observation, I guess, is that the supply chain is fantastic, and within the supply chain there's immense skills, but it's kind of patchy. And so I don't think that you could necessarily point to big swathes of the supply chain and say, well, that's it, that's your answer. I think we can see the capabilities within the supply chain, but it does need to be emphasised and brought out and developed and joined together. But I think that when it comes particularly to kind of digital capability, there is some fantastic stuff out there. And you know, maybe this room kind of indicates that type of thing. So I don't think that we need to fear for the basic capabilities. However, as an industry, we really do need to develop them and get them to be more the norm rather than the exception.
So what role does Project 13 take in creating these new skill sets that need to evolve? I think you spoke about having run a sort of an assessment of the readiness of industry.
Yes, we did do that. So as part of the digital transformation work stream, one of the things which we thought would be useful, and we were looking to try and find something that would have a big impact but for little input. And we thought one of the most useful things to do would be to understand the readiness of the industry for transformation. Because we're talking about digital transformation, it kind of stands to reason that, you know, it needs to transform, so how ready is the industry? And part of the thinking came from something called the technology readiness level. You know what that is, nods? So the technology readiness level is well established. If you Google it, you'll see that there's lots of examples of it. But basically, it kind of goes from kind of 1 to 9, and it takes technology through from it being a good idea to it being adopted, you know, being ready for market and being adopted. And so that's a really good thing. It's established. But what it doesn't do is say how ready the market is for the technology. And so we thought that there was a kind of a gap there, and that we needed to identify how ready the infrastructure industry is for adopting not just the technology, but adopting, you know, all of this transformation. So we developed something called the industry readiness level model, which is a bit of a mouthful, but you can see where it came from, TRL, IRL. And what that did under a number of quite simple headings, was identify what the readiness was. And so on a kind of a simple scale of kind of 0 to 5, basically the industry was coming out somewhere around 2, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just a reflection of where we are just now. But I think that was really important for us to understand where our starting point is, because then we can see where we want to get to, and then we can identify what we have to do to get from where we are to where we want to be. So that was kind of a key thing that the digital transformation workstream brought.
Are you comfortable that you were checking the right people, like the right supply chain? So if we talk about the concept of moving into a DFMA world where you have the concepts of digital twins, so a lot of the work gets done at the front end where this integrator is almost working in a virtual world. Our current supply chain doesn't really operate in that way. BIM's progressing but still has lots of bumps along the road. Do you feel that the supply chain is the one that we currently have, or do you think that's going to change quite considerably?
Yes, I do think it will change quite considerably. Yeah, I definitely do feel that. I can't predict the way in which it will change, but I think it has to change. And either that means the supply chain that we already have will transform to be suitable for this new world, or there'll be new entrants that are suitable. But one way or the other, things have to change. So I think definitely things have to change. But going back to the kind of the beginning of that question, whether or not we actually asked the right bit of the supply chain the questions, maybe not. What we were doing was starting with the owner organisation and saying that the questions that we are asking for the IRL were meant to be questions for the enterprise. And in Project 13 speak, the enterprise is everything. It is the owner and the integrator and the partner ecosystem. It's the whole thing. Probably because it was the first time we did it and was just starting off, we probably got the answer for the client organisation. Old speak client organisation rather than new speak enterprise. But you've got to start somewhere, and I think we've made a good start.
So are we mapping our enterprise world at this point in time? Like, is Project 13 looking at who constitutes this new enterprise? Because I'm always aware that the industry is made up of something like 97% SMEs, which are quite hard to locate, and we have very little data on them, and we tend to focus on the big 5, 6, 7, 8 companies, where the main money sits and where the main number of people operate. But what are we doing to get down into those supply chains and to make sure that the UK is ready for this sort of change?
Yeah, again, a really good question, because I think part of what we have to do and part of the job of the integrator is to get to those SMEs, because I think that a lot of the really good ideas, the fresh new ideas that we need, are actually in those smaller companies. And so it is an explicit intent that we get to those. I think you're right to point to it, though, because it is a challenge. And I would say not just the SMEs, but also suppliers and manufacturers who have something really good to offer to the overall solution that delivers the outcomes. And what we can't expect is that the existing tier ones have got all the answers. That's just not realistic. So we need a way to kind of pull it in, and that's called the integrator.
So this is quite fundamental change to occur in the process of a movement. How does it become big enough to connect all that way down without being linked, say, to a government initiative or some sort of change in policy or some sort of change in regulations? Like, what will force this change to actually happen?
So I think there are a number of things which should force it to happen, and some of them are pushes and some of them are pulls, and some of them are to do with the design of the change management associated with Project 13. So I think some of the pushes I've kind of mentioned already, that the existing model is broken. That the horse died a long time ago, so let's stop beating it. It's not going to get up. So there is an element of old model broken, have to go to a new one. And what I mean by that old model broken is that if who knows how long, let's say a few decades, the route to value has been about just trying to chew into the supply chain's margins. You can only chew into the margins so much, and there's nothing left anymore And if you chew any more than that, then companies go out of business, and we've seen that happen. And so that is no longer a kind of a route to value. We need a better way of getting to that value. And so part of the kind of the Project 13 view of how you get to value is by working together to a genuinely better solution that delivers these better outcomes, rather than just trying to get a cheaper version of a solution that somebody came up with first. So there's those kind of pushes. I think also when it comes to how you're going to get the change, and this is in the language of the movement, it's kind of a bit of a snowball thing. That if you can get a number of early adopters, not just testing it but proving it, then what that starts to do is get a snowball rolling, and then others will want to be part of that snowball. You get more early adopters, and then the movement is really moving. What I don't think we can do is suddenly change the whole industry at once, because it doesn't work that way. And you can't just have some big person at the top saying, thou shalt change, and it suddenly happens. It's got to be more organic than that. So I think that the Project 13 approach is really good. And start with something relatively small, prove it, and then get that ball rolling. And something which gives me hope about this actually working is that it's client-led. We have had initiatives in the past, and note that I use the word initiative, and Project 13 is not an initiative, it's a movement. We've had initiatives in the past that have been kind of supplier-led, and it doesn't go anywhere unless the client leads it. I think this needs client leadership, and that is precisely what the ICG is doing. So this really, to me, seems like the best opportunity we have for change.
Do you think clients are doing enough to get the supply chain ready? So if this is coming from client-led or enterprise-led, and we need to change the skill sets or to work out how to connect people together in different ways, or companies together in different ways, how does that actually filter down to SMEs who are probably, or to suppliers, or to people who are working potentially in slightly different fields at this point in time? They may not actually be in our supply chain at this moment in time, or they are in our supply chain, but they're working to these very tight margins that are the standard model of the industry. What can be done from the sort of tier 1 level to help with that?
Yeah, so I like that question as well. I mean, I think that in many ways this is the answer to the SME's prayers. So I don't think that a lot of the kind of SMEs we're talking about are the ones that need to do a lot of change. They just need it to be changed, and they can plug in. But I do think you're right to point towards the tier 1s, because there probably needs to be more change in there. And to my mind, what that means is that those of us who are tier 1s need to take Project 13 seriously and work out what our position on it is, and then do something about it. Because I guess in terms of position, it would be possible to see the principles, get totally on board with it, and help it to work. And I think the tier 1's got an enormous amount of influence to make Project 13 work. Or they could choose to just kind of sit on the sidelines, wait to see if it works or not, and if it doesn't work, kind of just walk away and say, told you so. Or if it does work, then kind of jump in later. I mean, alternatively, I guess tier 1s could say, I don't believe in Project 13, it's going to change my business model, I don't like it, I'm scared, and then actively try to stop it. So I think tier 1s need to really look into what Project 13 means, and have a position on it. Clearly, what I think tier 1 should do, and I come from a tier 1, so I can kind of say this. I think we should see the real value to the whole industry, if not the nation, and think I need to get on board with this, support it, help it to work, and for those client organisations that we work with, get on board with them and say, look, I really understand Project 13. I can see how we can make this work together, and that's exactly what those owner organisations and integrators will be waiting for. Would be tier 1s who are ready to get on board and plug in and be determined to jolly well make it work.
So over the next year, what can we expect to see from Project 13?
Well, we can expect to see those 6 early adopters making some serious progress, and we can hear back from how that's going. Hopefully there'd be some more early adopters joining in on that, and you can start to see the snowball moving. When it comes to the digital transformation workstream, which I notice you haven't asked me much about.
I'm expecting everyone else to do that.
We're doing quite a lot now with the ICG owner organisations in helping to develop digital transformation strategies for the enterprise, and so I think that we can start to see some of those strategies coming out and being publicised, and that would give many of the people in this room an opportunity to plug in. And certainly when it comes to a digital transformation strategy, it absolutely needs the supply chain to be part of it, because otherwise it's not a coherent enterprise strategy. So I would hope that we would see that happening in 2019.
Thank you very much. I think I've been given the the chance to open it up to the floor and ask Mark lots of questions about the digital transformation side of things.
That's great. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Mark. So we've now allowed 30 minutes now for some questions, both from you here in the room and for those that are online. So I'm just going to encourage the people who are online to send in their questions. Jonathan's going to wave at me if we have some good ones, or if we have any at all. I'm hoping that little wave suggested that we have some, Jonathan. We do. That's excellent. Right, okay. Well, should we go to the online questions first as a way to encourage our webcast friends? What have we got, Jonathan?
Okay, so
Perhaps come out from behind the screen so we can hear you.
okay, so we have one from Sally Hughes who asks: traditional procurement behaviour, drive down cost and transfer risk, is entrenched in many customer organisations and will provide a significant barrier to Project 13. What do you believe are the best ways to change that mindset paradigm and shift behaviours?
Yeah, so she's put her finger right on a really hot button, and I think that's exactly right. Those traditional procurement behaviours really do have to change. If I can just do a little bit of a riff on that for a moment. I think that a lot of the traditional procurement behaviours can be characterised, and forgive me, it is going to be a characterisation. It's going to be a cartoon rather than absolute reality. But it's a kind of a belief that the route to value is to come up with a specification for something and then get the cheapest price for it. And no matter how many times we get told, and we all understand that isn't the best value, because that initial price is very seldom what you end up paying at the end, and the specification against which the price was gained isn't necessarily the best answer anyway. So from 2 points of view, that's just the wrong way of doing things, particularly if you don't know exactly what you want. Maybe if you know precisely what you want, then that approach works, when you want that widget. But when you want a complex solution to a major issue, then it's different. And so I think that a different route to value is recognising that working together with those people who actually know the right way to an answer, that you move together to that best answer, which will both give you a lower whole life cost and also a better solution in the end. But then there's a big question: is how do you procure that? How do you procure that kind of thing when it's actually a journey that you go on to the right solution? And I think a lot of that is to do with procuring based on value, based on behaviours, based on all sorts of things which we're not comfortable with procuring on just now. So instead of just procuring on scope, you're going to procure on value. So massive culture change. And then I think when it comes to how you go about that, part of it is that the owner organisations themselves need to upskill, and that's a large part of what the work stream called Capable Owner was about. It's a recognition that in order to deliver all of the good stuff that we talked about just now, does mean a transformation within the owner organisation as well. And if that's led by the client organisations, then that again has an opportunity of working. And it's not the supply chain kind of pointing at the owner and saying, "Oh, your procurement guys, they're all old-fashioned." What it's a case of is helping the change to happen. So the owner organisations themselves recognise that change needs to happen, and they're putting in place programs and upskilling training programs to bring about that change. So that's the route, I think.
Do you think it would change in the gamification world? So if we're talking about having digital twins, and you can have, because a lot of this is about certainty and the fact that you start spending a lot of money as soon as you put materials on a site, or as soon as you procure your HVAC, or as soon as you procure your trains, etc. And that's where a lot of the fear comes from, and that's why they want intense certainty very early on in the process. Whereas if you're moving towards a world where you actually create a digital twin, isn't there an opportunity to use that as a way to break the whole procurement fear that we have? Because you can model it inside these computers before you actually push the button.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think that's a key part of it.
Right, open the floor for questions. That was the first time that came up. Sir, what's your question?
Just thinking about the life of the asset into operation and digital transformation, there are two worlds which could emerge. One which has very clearly defined data ownership roles across the integrators and the roles you mentioned earlier. Or that could be the other way, towards a more utopian sort of open source environment where all data is made available to all stakeholders. Which way do you see it going under a digitally transformed industry, and why? I just added why because everyone wants that.
Yeah, nice question. Can I ask which company you come from?
Capita.
Okay. So I definitely don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know is the straight answer. But I've got a preference. I think that we have to work out a lot of the answers to do with data ownership. And there are a number of different models that exist. The one that seems to be leading just now is that those who own the physical assets should also own the digital assets related to those. And particularly if you're talking about a kind of a digital twin type of scenario, where you have a digital representation of the physical assets, processes and systems, then it kind of makes sense that the people whose job it is to curate the physical asset should also own and curate the data related to it. That kind of makes sense. There are alternative views. There are some that would say that the person who owns the sensor should own the data, which is interesting because I guess in most cases the person who owns the physical asset also owns the sensor, owns the data, in which case there's no argument. But it would set up something quite interesting, wouldn't it? If you own an asset and I come along with a sensor and say, will you let me put the sensor on your asset and then I'll own the data and then I'll know all sorts of wonderful things which I'll sell to you. If you don't want to pay for the sensor, then that might be a way of having an interesting transaction, an interesting market. So I think there are conversations to be had about data ownership. My feeling is that we would move towards that non-personal data, that we're talking about asset data principally, would generally be curated by the physical asset owner. But then you had this other alternative of kind of having the open source. And I think that we also need to do a lot of work about definitions around open and what we mean. Because I think it would be entirely possible to live in a world where we have the data to be shareable. In other words, we've worked with clever people to sort out a data model that then means that our data is properly curated, it's got all the relevant metadata so that it is shareable. But just because it's shareable doesn't mean that it needs to be shared. And then we can talk about how you actually share data and which data is appropriate to be shared or not. But my view would be that we should absolutely structure our data and have an industry data model and individual data models informed by that that enable the data to be shareable. And also, if we're talking about open data, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone always gets access to it. And it doesn't mean that it's free. So I think that there's an awful lot to be discussed about data ownership, sharing of data, and payment for data as well.
And in fact, we will be discussing that on the 13th of February. Just plug for another MPA event, which in fact Mark is going to chair, on how accessing big data will change the way we deliver major projects. Unfortunately, Capita aren't members. You can't come, but you've got plenty of time to join.
Good wording.
There was another question at the back.
David Evely from Logical. How are the early adopters measuring the value of this approach relative to a more traditional approach, because that's what the owners are going to want to see before they adopt?
Yeah, so I don't know, I'm afraid. It is an absolutely crucial question, and I think that we have a lot of work to do as an industry to genuinely understand value. When I rather glibly talked earlier about value being expressed in terms of outcome per whole life pound, but how do you actually do that? We've got to put some work in to coming up with the metrics that are genuinely meaningful. And I would include in that productivity metrics and production metrics that we basically don't do very well. We're told that the construction industry has very poor productivity metrics compared to manufacturing. But when you dig into the details of that, you find some interesting things. So, for example, if we do shift some of the production from a construction site into a factory and thereby make construction more efficient, that gets counted in manufacturing metrics, not in construction metrics. And so, no matter how much we put into a factory, construction still looks rubbish. So we've got to change the metrics. And other things on the same lines is that at the moment I don't think that we can define exactly what we mean by the efficiency of infrastructure or the performance of infrastructure. So clearly what infrastructure is meant to do is provide a service to the ultimate customers, but we don't have the metrics to tell us how well the infrastructure is performing, either as a system, which should be an easier thing to work out, or as a service. And so until we can work out those kind of things, it's actually difficult to determine the genuine value of this kind of approach. So what we'll inevitably do is use some proxies in the meantime. My fear, I guess, is that we would end up using proxies which are very familiar to us, which are good at measuring the old way of doing things, not very good at measuring the new way of doing things, in which case it might not show a very rosy comparison. So I think that your question is a really good one, and it points towards an awful lot of work about us kind of changing the metrics and coming up with something that is more fit for purpose for the future industry rather than the past industry.
Jonathan, was there another online question?
We have several, but I'll give you one. Who in the chain governs the TRL/IRL process? Typically in aerospace, this is an independent body which ensures consistency across projects.
So, who in the chain describes TRL and IRL? The TRL is kind of defined already.
Sorry, can you define what TRL and IRL are for those of us who don't know?
So the TRL is the technology readiness level, and
Okay.
the IRL is the industry readiness
So what you were
level.
talking about before. Yeah.
So the technology readiness level is already defined, and so I guess that is already out there. It's on Wikipedia, so it must be a thing.
If you're not very ready, though, you won't find that, will you?
Sorry?
If you're not technically very ready, you won't find that.
Oh well, I think you would actually. If you get your phones out just now and type in technology readiness level, you'll get it. It's a real thing. So that's kind of governed. The IRL is more difficult, I guess, because that has been defined by Project 13, and that was a group of clients working together to define it. So maybe it's a question that's pointing towards the overall governance. Potentially, we could look to something like CDBB, that's the Centre for Digital Britain, to take on the ownership of it and make it more of a governed thing. But I think as we stand, having Project 13 ownership of it seems to be a good enough start.
Lovely, Danny.
Danny Trupp, BAM Nuts. I'm really intrigued by linking a number of those things back together at the governance level, particularly with the digital transformation. I'm struggling in my head to understand, is there a future for things like Bitcoin, blockchain, or the way that we integrate our supply chain and with the owner, recognising a lot of the adopters, in fact all the adopters are in regulated industries, how we actually square the circle about what is value for money in the eyes of, shall we say, the public.
Sorry. Am I allowed to answer the question?
one.
I'm quite interested in the whole concept of distributed ledger technology and how it can be applied in real world. So I was looking at a business case recently, which was actually for the gaming world, so mobile games, and the way that you can take payments within that sort of world in an easier way. So at the moment, you've got the intermediaries of Google and Facebook, etc., Apple, who take sort of 30% of the money, and it's a very slow mechanism for people to make money out of doing games online. For me, that links into, it immediately puts me in a world of, well, if we have our digital twin sitting there, and we had our taxes as a virtual currency sitting in this world, and we chose to pay our digital currency inside that world to get the things that we think we want, which is, I don't know, maybe a better hospital or a nice big, I don't know, car park at the end of our road so we can just park our car easily, or whatever happens to be the thing that we find most important. And if in that virtual world, like if we had a digital London, not just for your particular asset, but a full digital London, would that give a mechanism for people to understand the choices they're making? So it's not so much that would say 100% of everyone votes for a big, massive car park and to ban all cars from central London, etc., that would happen. But at least it would give our politicians a much more rigorous steer as to what we'd like to happen. And I think things like Bitcoin's probably the wrong technology, but the concept of distributed ledger technology, where there's a direct interface between the end user and government, I think there's some fantastic work being done now that may, not right now, but may at some point help us make better decisions along the way. And I think Brexit, dare I say the word, is one of those areas where people had to make that choice with such a limited amount of information. Whereas actually, if you could have seen the modelling and be able to see the impact, or even something like HS2, you know, what happens if we slowed this down by 5 miles per hour or 10 miles per hour? What would happen to the business case at that point in time? Or if we stuck in 3 more stations because I want to have a station near my house, what impact does that have? Because it's very hard for the general individual to be able to make those sorts of calls. So I think that the concept of things like distributed ledger technology that gives that link and gets rid of the intermediary and has mechanisms for playing with money in a different way has huge potential in the industry.
Mark, did you want that?
Yeah, just to add a bit. I mean, I think that these kind of technologies all have a place, and we will find out where they fit, and there'll be a whole bunch of new technologies which you haven't even imagined yet that will also have a place. And I think it's just really important for us to understand what the kind of the big picture is, the framework within which these technologies fit. Because I guess what I fear is that we hear about some very exciting technologies and they end up kind of being intense spots of light, but unless they're connected up in an intelligent way, they're kind of nothing. You know, there is that thing that technology without a purpose is just a toy. And so we have to give it that purpose and connect it up. And I think that the way, to my mind, that they do connect up is through the information value chain. So I'll just describe that very briefly. Kind of starting with the data that we've talked a little bit about, and that we want to have it much, managed much better, structured, the whole data model type of stuff. But it starts with the data. But then we make sense of that data, using all sorts of analytics, etc., that gives us insight. So now it has meaning. Adding meaning to the data gives it more value, and so you can see it going up the value chain. But what that insight then enables us to do is make better decisions. And I think the decisions end up being the kind of the fulcrum around which this value chain swivels. And then based on those decisions, you can make better interventions, and the better interventions lead to better outcomes. And so what that means is that we have this complete value chain all the way through from data to outcomes. And that suddenly points us to why data is important. It's because it leads to outcomes. But it has to go through those other stages to get there. And so I think that as an industry, we've got to up our game in every level in that. It's not just improving our data management, but improving our analysis, gaining insights. Also, we've got to do, I think, an awful lot around the decisions we make. We can challenge how we make decisions, given that we would have a lot better information, and we can manage uncertainty better as well, because we might not completely get rid of uncertainty. We'll still be making decisions in the presence of uncertainty, but we can manage it in relation to information and uncertainty. So I think we need to challenge how we make decisions, leading to these interventions and outcomes. Now, with that kind of that value chain, I think we can plug in things like blockchain onto it. It has a place, and IoT and machine learning, and big data. All of those things which we keep on hearing, they have a place in there, which then means they've got a purpose and they can connect up. And so, whenever I hear about new technology and some fantastic stuff is on its way, I kind of think, where does it fit? And it might fit in a number of different places. But if we can plug it into something that makes sense and connect it up, then it has real value. And blockchain, I think, will be fantastic. You can see it potentially rewarding people on a micro-transaction level for adding value to information. You kind of think that what engineers really do is add value to information. They kind of add more meaning. So why wouldn't they get rewarded for the value they add rather than the time they spend doing it? You can kind of see that blockchain might have a place in that. But my main point really is to say, all this great technology, let's find a place for it rather than just follow the technology because it's shiny.
Gentleman in the middle.
I'm James Hay, Unipart. With regards to a slightly different subject, with regard to owner and integrators, you make the point that there aren't necessarily a great deal of capable integrators out in the marketplace at the minute. Should the owner actually supplement the integrator?
Very much so. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And you can kind of imagine. I think that if we were to try and put together the best possible integrator just now, I think you could find all of the components out in the market, because all of those things that I mentioned before, they exist already, but just not in one place. And so I think that the ideal integrator would have a bit of an owner in it, and it would probably have a kind of a competent engineering consultant and a competent program manager and a competent construction manager. You can see if you got the best of them together, the best team, and put them together in a way that worked. And it's really important to kind of understand the behavioural parts of this and kind of the cultural elements, because just choosing the best people and sticking them together in a room doesn't necessarily mean the team will work. But if you've got the right capabilities and working as a unit, then that would be a great integrator. And I think that the owner part of it would be important. So when I said earlier on that I don't think you see any one integrator in the market, what I'm saying is I don't see one organisation that can step up and fulfil have all the capabilities. But I do see all the capabilities already in the market. It's just that they haven't come together yet.
Excellent. Joe, did you want to respond? No is a good enough answer.
No, I mean, I do find this model deeply interesting. What I'd hate to happen is that we end up having companies that call themselves integrators. Yeah. And then we get stuck with people who are trying to, once again, sell their services based on the need to deal with the cash flow and have a whole lot of people working for them. I'm deeply interested in the concept of breaking larger companies and having a bunch of small, agile groups who have their specialist skill that you pull together as an owner. So you say, I'm looking for these sets of skills, and you own that group of plug-and-play SMEs. And then the key to that is the role of government policymakers, etc., to create integration standards so that we do actually work to some sort of framework that comes together. So last thing we want is a whole lot of assets that collect the data in different ways. We need to have some sort of standards that mean we collect data in a certain way that means that those players can come together when they need to. We need to be more entrepreneurial.
Is somebody going to ask me about the Gemini principles?
Well, we have got a question at the back, so let's see if that's
Let's see if it is.
It's not, I'm afraid. But Dave Corbin, WIG, we are a member. I think it's great. I think it's change is needed, and it's great to hear about movement. So forgive me for my next bit, which is this sounds incredibly similar to what Egan said and Latham said, but some considerable years on. And I wonder how this is really going to stick, how we're going to really make it change.
Yes, so you are absolutely right. It is precisely what they said. They kind of got it right all that time back, didn't they? I mean, it's interesting.
Years.
Sorry, how many?
25 years.
Yeah.
50 since the first report.
But, so I mean, it shows how prescient they were. I think that the difference is the client leadership. That's the key thing for me, is that this is the infrastructure client group pulling this and driving it, making it happen, rather than just the supply chain with a wish list saying, wouldn't it be nice if there were more collaboration? These are important leading clients in the UK who are making this happen. And I haven't seen that before. That's not been my experience. I've seen loads of these reports come and go, and they all are fantastic at prescribing a better future, which is based on collaboration. But then actually putting it into practice is where the problem is. And so I think that's why this is so important as a movement rather than just another initiative. We've got plenty of reports piling up on the shelves, gathering dust, that tell us lots of good answers. But we've got to be in a different place now of actually doing it. And I think that's what Project 13 is seeking to do. My personal view is it's the best hope that we've had, and certainly in the 30 odd years of my career. And that's why I would encourage us all to kind of get behind it and do the very best that we can to make it work.
We're just saying, about 30 years, you don't look old enough. We've only got 5 minutes left to go, so I'm going to just prioritise questions from the online listeners, because we can carry on conversations over drinks afterwards.
And can I have a question about Gemini principles, please? Somebody asked me.
No, I haven't got any else, sorry.
Is there one, Jonathan?
No, there isn't.
No.
We can finish on that one.
So
What
one
do
here
we have online?
from Gary Sanderson, who says, do you consider that Project 13 is seeking to foster a new set of behaviours that are encouraged and reinforced by the changes in the asset delivery models? If so, what advice would you give to individuals seeking support and be part of the change regarding how they should change their behaviour?
It's a really important subject, because I think that behavioural change is key to actually making this work. In answer to the first part of his question, it would be an unequivocal yes. How people get involved in it, I mean, I think it's to do with stepping forward and offering the right kind of help at the right time to those who are trying to bring about the change. So I read out before the list of the early adopters. Those are the ones wanting to make the change just now. I think that's where we need to step up and give it the support. But I couldn't agree more with Gary. The behavioural change is central to this. Without it, it would just be the same old thing, kind of packaged differently, nobody believing it, and it would just fail if we don't also change behaviours.
So, would you agree?
Co-Create's entire business model is on behavioural change, because we've been doing change throughout the major projects industry for the last 20 plus years, and it never works unless there's a behavioural change. It's the only mechanism to make this work, and core to making that work is knowing who I tend to talk about the power of 10, the idea that there's sort of, if you can get 10 key people who truly make the difference. So if these 10 projects that come into play actually do successfully implement a different way of working, then that will drive a set of behaviours, because of the number of people that sit behind each of those. And yeah, behavioural change is always core to that.
Jonathan, we've got one more question from online.
Yes. Andrew Cowell has remarked that, Mark, you're a great advocate, but do we believe we also need to get shareholders on board to drive the movement?
Another good question, isn't it? These are all picking up on the key points. You're quite relentless about hitting all the right questions. So Andrew's right as well, isn't he? Because if shareholders don't buy into it, then again it doesn't happen. I think that there's an element of education needed across the whole supply chain. We've talked about the client organisations / owners and the integrators, and deeper down into the supply chain, and that's correct. But also we can kind of look upwards, and I guess what we see, or maybe what I see, is that there are some major shareholders that are absolutely on board with this and wanting to drive it. That might not be true for all of them. And so where you have big pension funds, for example, then there's a big incentive to have a whole life view. And you can see some of the owners, and I probably shouldn't mention specific companies here, but you can see some of the investors being very keen to drive these kind of behaviours because it leads to better overall outcomes for them as well. I think it is possible, though, to point to shorter-term investors with a different principle, different objective function. So I think maybe there is an element of education in various different directions which are needed to indicate that this really is the best way forward. So that's quite a long way round saying that Andrew's picked up on a really important point. Not all of the ultimate owners have the same kind of mindset.
We have reached the end of our time now online. I'm looking to our technical people to say there does seem to be some excitement in the room about carrying on this conversation. Can we extend this for 5 minutes and keep going? Looking at you, Adam.
Yeah.
Sure. Is there? I'm asking those online. Is there sufficient appetite to keep going for 5 more minutes? I'm sure the wine won't get too hot or cold, or whichever it is. Excellent. So there were more hands up in the room, which so Fred. Oh, sorry.
Clement. My only it's all great stuff that you just talked about, and I think behaviours needs to change, and probably needs to even start from the government, because a lot of these things are driven politically. A lot of projects in the country. My only worry is it seems to be another term saying integration management, and everything that we've discussed in there to me is actually project management. So how about actually upskilling the current, what do you call it, teams and companies, rather than bringing a new term? Because what happens is something else comes up and everybody tries to be that, and then we have 10, 15 years pass by and that hasn't been done, and then we bring something else. That's what you talked about in the Leighton report. How about upskilling the current, what do you call it, if it's, let's say, a Maze or a Bechtel or whatever, and we think information management or something else is not strong in there, how about upskilling that rather than creating a new term? And I think by doing that, we go through another tangent. By the time we try to get somewhere, something else comes up, and we never actually achieve the goal that you want to achieve. That's just my thinking anyway.
Yeah, so I think that you're right to put your finger on the upskilling. That is incredibly important. We're not just talking about kind of getting rid of everybody and getting in some new ones. I mean, it is about upskilling. So that is absolutely right. The bit that I probably don't agree with you on is saying it's just project management, because I think that some of the other stuff that I was talking about on production management and doing kind of design management and manufacturing management and logistics management and assembly management, all of those things are different from just project management. And then likewise for the information management. So I think project management is a key part of it, but I think it's only part. But I do agree with you that what we should be doing is upskilling, and people are capable of being upskilled. It's just that there needs to be that leadership. So yeah, I do agree.
I tend to hesitate to say it's anything about project management. I think that's something we've got into a habit of, is seeing everything as a project. And actually, if you're talking about it being owner-led, it'd be quite nice to stop thinking about everything as a series of projects. Because in fact, I mean, I think you use project skills, and I think you're completely right, that we should be upskilling within the owner organisations what it takes to deliver what will be a discrete set of packages. But it'd be much nicer if Simon Adiman talks about this quite a bit, of why do we think it's unique every time? Like, why do we start from scratch every time? Why do we? This is if you're Anglia Water and you're running. These aren't discrete packages. You're doing the same thing over and over again. You're no different to any manufacturing company. There's always going to be little tweaks to it, but actually stop looking at it as a series of discrete packages where we get all hands to the pump and we bring people in to do this for us, and these skills should be sitting in these organisations, or they should have a mechanism to pull them in when they need them and not feel so reliant on a supply chain.
Because if you look at Lean Construction Management Institute, Lean Construction Institute, if you look at all their principles and everything else, it's similar. They're trying to do the same thing. So all I'm trying to say is there may be so many different models going on in the country, and so if you do that, you don't actually achieve your goal, rather than just putting your just.
So as a Christmas bonus, can I answer the question that you didn't ask?
Please tell us about.
Yes.
Sorry, Mark. Because we've got lots of people online as well, I'm just very conscious of them. Jonathan's been waving at me that we do have a question, and then we're going to have to let them go.
So Philip Isgar is jumping up and down.
Yeah.
And he says...
What, Philip, did you say?
Yeah.
Philip Isgar. He's been messaging me about something here as well, so he's very keen.
Mark made an excellent point earlier about the client taking innovative ideas directly from SMEs. How do we make that happen without having to go through the tier 1 suppliers? Some SMEs are nervous.
That's a great question.
It is, and I don't have the kind of the full answer on it. I think the simple answer is to say we must. You know, it's part of what that way forward has to be, because as I said earlier on, I think a lot of the answers are within the SMEs. I think a key part of the answer is to do with how the integrator is set up, and the integrator's job is to pull in the best from wherever it is. And it doesn't matter if it's a big company or a small company. The idea is to pull in the best ideas, and so that is the integrator's job. But I think that we'll have to see how integrators are actually set up, it's a bit of a mirror image of one of Joe's fears, that if we just get the same tier 1s turning up and saying, well, I was the tier 1 that you knew yesterday and today I'm an integrator, that might not bring about the kind of change that we need. So I think that with the kind of the redesigned integrator as anticipated by Project 13, then that will open up these doors to the SMEs, and I would say others as well, who can help to deliver really interesting components of a better solution. But that's kind of the challenge. It's for the integrator to be set up in that kind of way.
As an SME, I'm really interested in the idea that the politicians stop providing the time and cost on our major projects and actually did something more about saying these are the skills we need to have as UK PLC, and do something about providing that training across the board so that we have a healthy supply chain, so that integrator does have those sorts of places to go into.
I mean, I've been kind of resolutely not wearing a MacDonald hat tonight. I've just been wearing a Project 13 hat. But I think part of the answer to that last question comes from very momentarily wearing a MacDonald hat. And that's to say, particularly in the digital space, we're finding that we don't have all the gifts. And so we desperately need to bring in these kind of skills from SMEs. So we're actively hunting them out now. It's not just a case of, if they happen to say the right thing on the right day, that we might let them in. We're actively hunting SMEs who can help us in delivering what we know we need to deliver for our clients. So I think there will be ways in for SMEs.
Lovely. I'm going to stop it there because we have to say goodbye to all our webinar audience. So thank you very much to Joe and to Mott. I know the people in the room can carry on this conversation later. I'm drawing a line under our webcast.
Mark,
so
please share what you wanted to share with everybody, because
Because
everybody
we-
kind of gets
we can
curious
share that once
now.
we've got rid of our webinar.
No, I'm not telling you.
So farewell to our webinar audience to sign off. I'm going to say a few thanks and a few notes, and then we can carry on in this room, and there's wine and mince pies. But thank you very much to everybody that's come tonight. Thank you everybody that was online. Thank you, of course, to Joe and to Mark for putting the effort in for this. Thank you very much to Bentley Systems for hosting, because we couldn't possibly do this without their hospitality and their space and their food and their drink. Especially to Adam, who is our technical genius in the corner. Thanks also to the Institution of Civil Engineers and Project 13 and I3P, who have promoted this event through their channels as well. And Sarah.